Welcome everyone. My report is on recommendation for addressing health risk from nuclear power plants. Nuclear power plant is essential for sustainable energy production, providing about 10% of global electricity. As a low carbon energy source, it's vital in combating climate change. There's no doubt that nuclear power plants play a crucial role in energy production. However, they emit low dose radiation, which can potentially pose long-term health risks. There are growing concerns that even regulated levels of radiation exposure within nuclear power plants can contribute to serious health conditions. The purpose of this study is to evaluate the association between radiation exposure from nuclear power plants and the risk of both cancer and non-cancer diseases, with a focus on occupational and environmental exposure. By investigating this potential health risk, the study aims to provide valuable insight that could inform regulatory standards and guidelines. The goal is to better protect workers and residents from the adverse health effects of radiation. The result of this study could significantly contribute to improving current safety protocols and public health policies. The scope of the problem is, while seemingly negligible, it has been linked to increased risk of cancer and cardiovascular diseases. Workers in nuclear facilities face occupational hazard, while residents near this plant may also experience elevated health risk. This study aims to evaluate the health risk posed by radiation exposure in nuclear power plants. It seeks to identify regulatory gaps that may leave workers and residents vulnerable to long-term health effects. The ultimate goal is to inform safety measures and public health intervention to mitigate this risk effectively. The research question purpose was to assess the health risk, particularly cancer and non-cancer diseases. For the data, we used the secondary data from peer-reviewed studies, while at the same time focusing on the cancer and non-cancer health risk associated with radiation exposure. In order to collect this data, I systematically reviewed studies from well-established databases, including PubMed, Cochrane Library, and Web of Science. These sources were selected because they are trusted and they are peer-reviewed academic articles. The inclusion criteria were specific. Studies that examined both cancer and circulatory diseases caused by radiation exposure. I also focused on research involving workers in nuclear facilities and residents living near this plant, as these groups are directly affected by radiation. I limited the review to studies published in the last decade to ensure the findings were current. Studies related to catastrophic events like Chernobyl were excluded, as these situations do not represent typical radiation exposure scenarios. Once the relevant studies were collected, I employed both quantitative and qualitative analysis methods to synthesize the data. I focused on statistical measures such as the relative risk and odds ratio to assess the magnitude of cancer risk. I performed a thematic analysis to identify recurring health issues across the studies. This process involved grouping similar findings and interpreting the data to highlight the health effect of long-term radiation exposure. In some cases, I used meta-analysis techniques to combine findings from multiple studies. The chosen methodology was particularly appropriate for addressing the research question because it allows for a comprehensive and balanced analysis of a large body of existing literature. Given the complexity and the scale of health risk associated with nuclear radiation, the systematic review methods help consolidate findings from various studies, ensuring that all relevant data is considered. One of the main challenges encountered was difficulty in finding studies and directly linked radiation exposure to non-cancer diseases, such as circulatory disorders. In order to address this, I expanded the inclusion criteria to allow for studies that at least partially discuss these health outcomes, ensuring the review could still capture the important effect of radiation exposure. Further, workers in the nuclear power plant face a 15% higher risk of mesothelioma, particularly in facilities with insufficient protection. These findings highlight the critical need for enhanced safety protocols. Residents near nuclear power plants are also at risk. Thyroid cancer rates are 12% higher among those living within 30 kilometers of such plant, while children under 5 years have a 20% greater likelihood of developing leukemia. These statistics underscore the urgency of revising regulatory framework to prioritize community safety. Workers in nuclear power plant and residents around the power plant experience elevated risk of non-cancer diseases. Circulatory diseases including heart diseases and cerebrovascular diseases showed increased incidences as well as mortality rate. These findings highlight significant health consequences beyond cancer, underscoring the potential long-term effect of radiation exposure on cardiovascular health. Current radiation safety standards do not adequately protect vulnerable populations such as children and pregnant women. Research shows significant health risk at exposure levels as low as 20 msf per year, far below the current regulatory limit of 50 msf per year. This calls for immediate action to revise these standards. While existing regulatories address cancer risk, they often neglect non-cancer outcomes like circulatory diseases. Moreover, there is a lack of long-term health data for residents living near nuclear plants, which limit our understanding of chronic exposure effect. Addressing these gaps is critical for creating more effective policies. Advanced dosimeters should be deployed to ensure precise radiation measurement. Continuous tracking of cumulative exposure will enable early detection of a risk group and facilitate preventive measures. This technology can significantly enhance workplace and community safety. Based on Lean and others 2024, regulatory standards need to be revised to lower acceptable exposure limits based on recent findings of adverse effect at lower doses. Additional special attention should be given to protecting children and pregnant women who are particularly vulnerable to radiation-related risk. Education is a critical component of prevention. Workers should undergo mandatory radiation safety workshops. Public awareness campaigns should inform communities about risk and protective measures. Empowering individuals with knowledge can significantly reduce health risk. Long-term health surveillance programs are essential for monitoring the impact of radiation. These programs should prioritize vulnerable population. In conclusion, both workers and residents face heightened risk of cancer and circulatory diseases due to low-dose radiation exposure. Current safety regulations are inadequate to address this risk, particularly for vulnerable populations like children and pregnant women. To enhance protection of both individuals working in nuclear power plants and those living near them, there is need to immediately revision regulatory standards on radiation exposure. Anyone that has a question? We have come to the end of this report presentation. Thank you for your time and please feel free to ask any question. I'll be glad to answer as best as I can. Thank you once again.